I own a PlayStation 4 and will occasionally find good games at reduced prices for it. When this happens, I buy those games, but they almost always end up waiting for months before I decide to actually play them. God of War is a prime example of this. I've had this game for several months and decided to sit down and play it very recently. Before I dive into the actual review of the game, let me tell you a bit more about my experience with the series as a whole. I've played almost all God of War games so far, including those that came out on handheld devices with the exception of one. My relationship with them has been one of mixed feelings. The reason for that is that the gameplay was almost always quite mindless and was basically a non-stop sequence of arena fights and platforming. I'm not a big fan of this, especially because it tends to bore me after a short time if not executed exceptionally well. The previous games did a solid job but were not quite exceptional. Therefore, I did tend to get bored. What kept me hooked was the fact that they told entertaining stories and were very bombastic in their execution from start to finish. I can hardly think of more epic fights than the ones against gods and titans in the series. So in a way I was expecting more of the same, bombastic boss fights with more boring normal battles and a bit of platforming. This new God of War does all of that, but has improved greatly upon pretty much everything that comprises it. Let's start with the gameplay. Climbing, fighting, exploration. Those are all keywords here. The platforming is excellent, it works really well, and I don't think there was even a time when I felt that Kratos is not doing what I actually want him to do. What I still find annoying is that at times you will stand in front of something super tiny like a few small rocks, over which Kratos should have no trouble climbing, but because the game wants you to find another way around it, you can't do anything and have to look for a new path. This is a minor issue and a common occurrence in games, especially those with a more open map design. However, it feels to me like a more creative solution could have been applied here so that those obstacles at least look a bit more difficult to overcome. When it comes to the fighting, the game has seen some serious improvement. God of War is now a proper RPG and features skills as well as equipment drops and even crafting, and since Kratos is being accompanied by his young son Atreus, who is in fact a very capable warrior in terms of gameplay, your combat effectiveness is also determined by how well you synergize with his abilities. The player has active control over Kratos, meaning that you can move and attack with him, while Atreus is controlled passively. In other words, he will follow and engage in a bit of his own, but can also focus your target with his arrows and skills at the press of a button. When I realized that his son will be along for the ride, I was happy from a narrative perspective and worried from a gameplay one. Normally, having an NPC character follow you around means that they need protection, can get stuck, and who knows what else. Nobody likes escort missions. Luckily, this is not the case here. Atreus will follow at equal speed, and all of his animations involving platforming and movement are mostly tied to those of Kratos, meaning that no matter his distance from you, he will always get on a boat or hop on Kratos' back while he's climbing as soon as Kratos does the related action, and this causes no additional slowdown. His son also has his own equipment and skills, giving the player the ability to adapt the character to one's own gameplay preferences. While the equipment can be changed, you don't get that much of it throughout the game. Most of the time you only get very poor quality items. The nice thing is that they will directly impact Kratos' appearance. The game has a level system determined by your equipment. In essence, it tracks your stats and will determine what level you are based on those item stats. At first, it would seem like that is not really relevant, but later on, it has a bad habit of hiding nicer rewards behind very high level enemies. I have had several occasions where I fought a super strong enemy which would literally kill me in a single hit while they have a large health bar and I did very limited damage to them. The game even tells you that these kind of enemies are to be fought much later on and you should not mess with them, but what kind of a man is playing God of War and running from a fight? It went so far that I actually fought one of the strongest endgame bosses, a Valkyrie, relatively early on and fought her for actual 8 hours before I managed to defeat her. I was vastly underleveled, but as someone who has played every Dark Souls game to date, I'm trained at the art of dying a million times and learning boss patterns to perfection in the process. So I did defeat her in the end, and quite frankly the feeling of having done so was exhilarating. At this point, you're probably wondering why I'm telling you all of this. The reason is that I have never had any experiences with any of the other God of War games before like this one. And that is because this particular game is very different from the other ones. This is an RPG, and it comes with all of its strengths and weaknesses. If you want to play the game right, then you will have to explore, upgrade your equipment to perfection, and fight extremely tough optional bosses. And yes, you will also have to grind. This is not necessary, but it is required if you wish to really get everything the game has to offer. There's an optional realm with its own quests and rewards, which demands that you essentially grind through a labyrinth many times, collect a special resource, and use it to unlock special chests and battles. At first it seemed like an interesting idea, but at some point I was very bored by it and basically doing it while listening to a video in the background. Most people will probably skip this as it is not needed, but I am a completionist and I could not help myself. The fighting system in the game is designed very well. It all feels very satisfying and Kratos is a force to be reckoned with. If anything, I would say that the character's age has only made him more formidable and that his full beard commands respect. For the most part, you will be using his new axe as a weapon, which can also be thrown and called back. This function is extremely useful when solving puzzles since the axe has a frost effect and will also freeze various contraptions, causing them to stop moving. This comes in handy during fights as well, especially because you can use the callback function to inflict extra damage upon your foes if you position yourself behind them as it flies back towards you. Atreus also gains different arrow types throughout the game and they come with their own effects, which can influence the battlefield quite substantially. The presentation of the fights here is something I have to commend the developers on. As I have mentioned before, that was one of the series' strong points in the past. However, this effect was mostly achieved through the use of enormous enemies. In the game, most of your fights, even the ones against bosses, will be against opponents of a similar size, and they are still amazing to look at and to play through. Even the battles against simple enemies can look amazing because of how epic the combat flow can be at times. The game's map is now segmented. You have one very large map, which is more open in its design, and several smaller hubs which are more linear. On all of these you will have tons of secrets and even secret bosses. Many places will only become available at a later point when a new way of interacting with the world is given to Kratos and his son. So some backtracking is involved, but the good news is that the world will change from time to time based on the story progression, and new side quests will open up as well, making that backtracking a lot more interesting and rewarding. And now let's talk about the story. While the previous games always featured interesting stories and those were mostly about revenge and fury, this one goes much deeper. Kratos is older and a lot wiser. He has a son and he wants him to be better than his father has been. Their relationship is minimal at first, mostly because Kratos has been absent from most of the boy's life up until now. What really amazed me was the fact that the game starts very strong. Kratos' wife is dead. We as the player have never known her, but the scene of her cremation is powerful enough to make us feel as if we have. You can see the pain in the eyes of the once merciless god of war. He has loved this woman, his son is trying to be strong. It is a powerful scene and is the basis of the game's main quest. We find out that the deceased's last wish was to have her ashes spread from the highest point of all the realms. As I was playing through this, I kept thinking about how well all of this is done. The voice acting, the animations, even for a AAA title, this was impressive. And then a mysterious stranger arrives and attacks Kratos, someone who was clearly no ordinary human, as he was having no problems keeping up with our protagonist. A bombastic fight which lasted very long, but it was the hook that I needed. This was the moment I knew I would lose so much sleep because of this game, and I was completely right. However, the game is not perfect, because as you know, there really aren't any perfect games. I did encounter bugs of various magnitude. One of the most important story-related cinematics was completely without any voice sounds. I could hear the ambient noises and some music in the background, but no voices. I had to actually go on YouTube and find the same cinematic in there in order to understand what was happening, because a lot was happening and without context it was all confusing as hell. At an early point of the game, I could clearly see a secret area blocked off by something. As I walked around trying to figure it out, suddenly Kratos mentions that perhaps Atreus' new arrows can be of help here. The problem is, he had no new arrows. I was still with the most basic ones from the start of the game. This, however, made me think that I'm missing something, so I spent about 15 minutes trying to see if there's not a way to get some arrows, or maybe to change some arrows that Atreus already has. Who knows? In the end, I went online and found out that this is a bug some people have experienced. The secret was to be unlocked at a later point when you actually do get new arrows. So this information that I was getting from Kratos was basically wrong. It was too early for it. Another thing that I found very annoying is that Atreus would at times suddenly just say something like, "Hey, what's that?" But his character would not point at anything. So even if he's supposedly seeing something, it could be anything and in any direction. Most of the times it seemed like there was nothing to notice. They could have made it so at least he points at something or describes the location that he's seeing it at. Right now I just, walking around, hey, what's that? And I look like a dumbass, can't find what he means, and most of the times there was nothing. Another thing that I want to complain about, although that isn't so bad, is the fast traveling system. The name is very confusing because it is actually very slow. You have to first enter into another realm. Then while inside that realm, you can either walk around in circle or wait in place. In both cases, a magical door will appear and you can then enter that door, and on the other end of that door is going to be your destination. Be aware, however, that this is all a hidden loading screen and it is very annoying. I just don't see the point of it. I'd rather have a proper loading screen. It would definitely take a lot less time. Now you will hear some sort of conversation while in there, which helps a bit, but it is slow and boring, and so boring in fact that I ended up ignoring it unless I really had no other option. They tried to pad it. The game generally has absolutely no loading screens and you can just walk from one end to the other without noticing any kind of loading except the fast traveling. But still, this fast traveling is just so slow that I don't know if it's really worth being called fast traveling at that point. All in all, I had a great time with this game and it took me a whole week to finish. It's without a doubt the best God of War game by far. It tells a great story, the characters are interesting and fun, the voice acting is phenomenal, the gameplay is similar to the old games and at the same time very, very different. I like the previous games, I loved this one. I can wholeheartedly recommend this game to anyone who owns a PlayStation 4. It's definitely a must-have. Let's hope that this platform exclusivity will be removed at some point so that everyone has the chance to play this gem. I simply detest this anti-consumer practice with exclusive games. If the hardware allows it, all games should be available on all platforms. Thank you for watching my review of God of War on the PlayStation 4. If you wish to support my channel, please take a look at my Patreon link in the description of this video, and I hope you will give my other videos a chance as well. Have a great day.